Thank you for joining us today for our project support webinar on Erasmus Key Action 1 Vet and Adult Education Learner and Staff Mobility. This webinar is for beneficiaries who have been successful in gaining funding under the decentralised strand of Key Action 1 known as Vet Learner and Staff Mobility and Adult Education Staff Mobility under the 2017 call. This webinar will be covering key information you need to know for your project, such as managing your grant and using IT tools, and we'll cover and expand on the information provided at the Key Action 1 convention on the 22nd of June 2017. So just to give you an overview of what we'll be covering today, I'll start by giving you a quick run through of the main parts of your grant agreement and each of the annexes to your grant agreement. I will then quickly recap Mobility Tool Plus and your responsibilities as part of the IT tools that you will need to familiarise yourself with in order to manage your grant. Following this, I will give an overview over the different monitoring activities used by the National Agency. Then I will cover the reporting requirements, the different types of report required, plus some hints and tips for completing and submitting them. I will give an overview of the dissemination methods and requirements expected throughout your project lifetime, and will highlight the Erasmus Project Results platform, which some of you may have previously known as VAMA. Finally, we'll mention the next steps and how to contact us for support. So, your grant agreement and annexes are the cornerstones of your project, and it is imperative that you understand the content so you're clearly aware of your contractual responsibilities and to ensure all activities are eligible. So with this in mind, I will start by outlining what your grant agreement actually is. So what is the grant agreement? Well, firstly and most importantly, it's a legally binding contract between you as the beneficiary of a Key Action 1 project and the UK National Agency. It covers the rules and requirements for managing your grant, like eligibility of costs and what you need to evidence project activities. So it's very important that you take the time to familiarise yourself with the information in the agreement. This information includes key details about your project, such as your project start and end date, your grant amounts and budget details, payment amounts and due dates, as well as reporting deadlines. As well as tailored information about your project, the grant agreement is also an excellent resource when you need some guidance for managing your grant and delivering mobilities. For example, there's information about supporting your participants and ensuring their health and safety while on mobility. And finally, the grant agreement includes template documents that need to be used to formalise responsibilities, requirements, and learning objectives between you and your participants. For those of you who have already managed the Key Action 1 project, there are some differences between the previous year's grant agreements and the ones for 2017, which I'll highlight as I go through the different documents. All grant agreements follow the same general structure, but there are some differences in the documents depending on whether you're managing a vet or adult education project, or a mono or multi-beneficiary project. To start with what's the same, all agreements have special conditions, key action, field and project-specific information for managing your project. Annex 1 General Conditions, standard rules for all EU grants. Annex 2 Description of the project, estimated budget of the project, list of other beneficiaries. It's a breakdown for the project by budget heading and activity types, as well as a list of all participating organisations. Annex 3 Financial and Contractual Rules. Key action and field-specific information about eligible costs, triggering events, reporting and evidence requirements. Annex 4 Applicable rates. Key action and field-specific unit costs for each budget heading for UK projects. So let's start with the special conditions. This is where you can find information that is specific to your project. The special conditions include a contents page to help you find the information you need when you need it. Also, some of the articles in the general conditions are explained at the end of the special conditions. Obviously, all the information in your agreement is important and will help you manage your grant and implement your project successfully, but I want to highlight some of the key articles for you. Article 1.3.3 details the type of budget transfers that you're able to do that don't require a formal amendment of your grant agreement. Article 1.4 covers the reporting and payment arrangements for your project. This includes the type of reports that you will need to submit and the deadlines you will need to meet, the payment structure that you've been offered and the amounts you can expect, and how you should work out the exchange rate if you need to convert costs between euro and another currency. Article 1.9 explains the requirements for using and updating the ECIT tools for Erasmus projects. Article 1.11 explains your responsibilities for ensuring that any materials you produce for your project can be easily identified as being funded through the Erasmus Plus programme. In particular, this means you should make sure any materials include the name of the EU in full, the EU flag, and the name of Erasmus Plus programme. You should also add a disclaimer if this is appropriate for the material. Article 1.12 explains how the financial support for participants is worked out and the different ways that participants might receive this funding. You can either transfer the full amount for each of the budget categories listed in the article directly to the participant or provide the support for each of the budget categories. You can also combine these options, and you should make sure that whichever option you use is appropriate for your participants. Finally, Article 1.15 covers some provisions that are required in the UK. These include your responsibilities for data protection, ensuring equal opportunities, the protection of children and vulnerable adults, and health and safety. Next is Annex 1, which is the general conditions. This is where you can find the standard rules for all EU-funded grants. Please note that this information is not specific to Erasmus+, which is why you should read it in conjunction with Article 1.17 of the Special Conditions, as this explains any differences in how you should understand the general conditions for Erasmus+. Once again, you should read all the information in the general conditions, as it is important to know in order to manage your grant. But I do just want to highlight a few of the articles. Article 2.2 sets out your general obligations for managing your grant in line with the agreement. Inform the national agency of anything that may affect the implementation of your project and of any changes to your organisation. Article 2.13 explains what to do if there's any changes that mean you need to request an amendment. I'll go over this in a bit more detail later. Articles 2.16 and 2.17 cover suspension and termination. Hopefully these articles won't become applicable to your project, but it is still important that you make sure that you're aware of the circumstances under which you or the national agency may suspend or terminate a project. Article 2.19 covers the conditions of eligibility of costs incurred by you during the project. As I've already mentioned, this information is applicable to all EU grants, so you'll also need to be familiar with the specific information for Key Action 1 in Annex 3. Finally, Article 2.27 explains your responsibilities to keep documents related to your project and how long you need to keep them. If the amount of your grant is not more than €60,000, then you need to keep all documents for 3 years. If your grant is more than this, then you'll need to keep them for 5 years. This article also includes the checks the national agency might undertake on your project, including visiting you to perform an on-the-spot check, as well as checks that might be undertaken by the European Anti-Fraud Office or the European Court of Auditors. Next is Annex 2, which covers the budget and participating organisations. Annex 2 is where you can find the breakdown of your grant amount by budget heading and activity type. This document has become more detailed in recent years, but you'll be pleased to hear that this hasn't made it harder to understand. In fact, you should find that the breakdown of your grant is clearer and easier to understand, which will make it easy for you to manage your grant. This year, Annex 2 also includes a list of all the other participating organisations in your project. You should use Annex 2 when implementing your project to make sure that you're completing the same activities that you planned in your application. This is very important because the national agency will use Annex 2 of your agreement during the assessment of your final report. Annex 3 covers the rules for your project. Annex 3 is where you can find out all of the rules for evidencing the eligible costs for each budget heading in your project. All the information specific to each budget heading is grouped together. Also, any relevant information about eligible costs, triggering events, and evidence requirements for each budget heading that used to be in the general conditions has been moved to Annex 3. For those of you new to Erasmus+, a triggering event is simply the term given to the conditions that need to be met to show that the activity for a given budget heading has taken place. So, using travel as an example, you'll be able to check how travel costs are calculated using the distance band and unit costs, the conditions for meeting the triggering event that the participant has actually undertaken the reported travel, and the supporting documents of either a signed declaration from the receiving organisation or travel tickets and invoices needed to show that the triggering event has happened. Annex 3 also provides some Key Action 1 specific information about the types of checks the national agency may undertake on your project and how your final report will be assessed and the impact this may have on your final grant amount. Annex 4 is where you can find the amounts for the unit costs for all budget headings, except special needs support and exceptional costs, since these are based on actual costs and how these are calculated. This document has a specific unit cost for UK beneficiaries, so you should use this if you need to make any budget transfers. There are two different types of grant agreements: multi-beneficiary if you are part of the UK consortium, and a mono-beneficiary. The last section of the grant agreement for both mono-beneficiaries and multi-beneficiaries are the template documents. These templates are dependent on the field and focus of your project. As a rule, all grant agreements include templates for a grant agreement between the beneficiary and the participant, and either a mobility agreement for staff or a learning agreement for learners. The multi-beneficiary agreement has an extra annex compared with the mono-beneficiary agreement. Multi-beneficiary agreements for projects have a consortium of UK organisations led by a coordinator, have Annex 5, which includes all the mandates with consortium partners, and Annex 6, which makes up of the applicable templates for the key action and field of your project. Mono-beneficiary agreements for projects that have a sole UK beneficiary have Annex 5, which is made up of the same templates. So it's just the number of the annexes that's different. A mandate is signed by the consortium coordinator with each of the UK consortium partners. This gives the consortium coordinator the responsibility to enter into a contract with the UK national agency by signing the grant agreement on behalf of the rest of the consortium. It doesn't detail any of the roles and responsibilities between partners for the implementation of the project, so the mandate doesn't replace the need to have clear agreements between the organisations in the project. Likewise, it doesn't cover the relationship between UK organisations and receiving organisations abroad, so should not be used in place of a proper agreement like a Memorandum of Understanding. I'm now going to go through some of your responsibilities for managing your grant and what support you can expect from your project officer at the national agency. Your responsibilities will be slightly different depending on whether you're a sole beneficiary or the coordinator of a UK consortium. As a sole beneficiary, you're responsible for ensuring that your project is implemented in line with the activities planned in your application and with the rules outlined in the grant agreement. As a consortium coordinator, you have the same responsibilities as a sole beneficiary, but you also need to make sure your consortium partners are aware of all the relevant eligibility requirements and act as a liaison for the national agency if any information is updated on the participant portal. Every Key Action 1 VET and adult education project will have a dedicated project officer at the national agency. Your project officer is a member of the Key Action 1 team at the UK National Agency, and so will be able to support you with specific queries during your project. We also have a Manage Your Grant section on the Erasmus website, where you'll be able to find useful resources developed by the national agency, including the Key Action 1 handbook, which will help you during your project. We also have the Erasmus helpline that you can contact if your project officer is unavailable or you just have a general query. But however you get in touch with us, we'll always aim to help you within 2 working days. I just want to mention that while your project officer will always try to help with any queries you might have, there are certain things they won't be able to do. In particular, your project officer can't read drafts of amendment requests or reports before they're submitted. Your project officer also won't be able to check that the exact amounts and percentages have been observed at any budget transfers during your project, as this will be checked at final report stage. To ensure your project expenditure is eligible, there are some general principles to consider. All costs are incurred and activities must have taken place within the project start and end date within your signed grant agreement. All costs must relate to the activities detailed in your application in line with Annex 2 of your grant agreement. All costs must be related to the project. Unit costs must not overlap with actual costs. The two must remain separate. The exact eligibility requirements for each budget heading are in Annex 3 of your grant agreement. Following these general principles and referring to your grant agreement will help you to avoid incurring ineligible costs. But as well as making sure your expenditure is in line with planned project activities, you should also be aware that losses from exchanging costs between currencies and any bank charges cannot be claimed against the project. Also, you should make sure that no activities are funded from more than one EU grant, or you will be at risk of double funding. We understand that sometimes, despite the best plans, changes happen. To help you manage this, your grant agreement already gives you the option to complete budget transfers. Article 1.3.3 details the type of budget transfers that you're able to do that don't require a formal amendment of your grant agreement. I'll be going through a brief example of this in a little while. Generally, this allows you to transfer between budget headings that are both based on unit costs or from a budget heading based on unit costs to one based on actual costs. As a rule, though, you can't transfer from budget heading based on actual costs to one based on a unit cost. Each type of budget heading also has fixed limits based on a percentage of the overall amount for the budget heading in question. For example, for both VET and staff projects, Article 1.3.3 of your grant agreement concerning the options for a budget transfer state that you can transfer up to 100% of organisational support costs into travel costs, individual support costs, and in respect of Key Action 104 staff projects only, into course fee costs. Let's use an example to demonstrate this. This example states that originally one accompanying person was attending a 14-day mobility with 10 participants in Germany. Due to staff changes, they need to stay for 7 days and then swap halfway through the mobility. You may wish to change the attendance of accompanying persons on mobilities as per the example above, where the project wished to send 2 accompanying persons for 7 days each instead of 1 accompanying person for 14 days. The unit costs for accompanying person travel and individual support are shown above and can be found at Annex 4 of your grant agreement. As you are sending another accompanying person to Germany, you will need extra travel costs. The unit cost for travel is €275, so we can transfer 275 out of the organisational support into travel costs. So organisational cost decreases by €275 to €3,225 and travel costs increase by €275 to €550. As the total duration of the accompanying person's mobility to Germany remains the same, no extra individual support is required. However, if one accompanying person needs to stay an extra day to complete a handover, you will require 1 day's worth of individual support. The amount for an accompanying person for Germany is €120 per day, which would increase individual support to €1,800 and decrease organisational support to €3,105. I hope you have found this example useful. If you are unsure about how to implement a budget transfer, please read Article 1.3.3 of your grant agreement and contact your project officer for any additional guidance. If you need to make a change that isn't covered by the options provided by the budget transfers, you can make a request to the national agency by contacting your project officer. They will provide you with the correct form to complete, sign and return to the national agency electronically. Some things like updating your contact details or bank details will be a minor change that will only need you to notify the national agency with the new information. It is important to inform the national agency of these minor changes so that we are able to contact you with pertinent information and so that any payments are not delayed, for example. However, some changes are seen as significant, as having the potential to call into question the original assessment decision. Examples of significant changes are shown on the slide. In these cases, you would need to submit a detailed justification about the change and the impact it would have on the project. For significant changes, the national agency will undertake an assessment of the information you provide in conjunction with your initial application and its assessment. You should also bear in mind that there is no guarantee that the national agency will be able to approve your request, so it's very important that you stay in touch with your project officer during your project, and especially at first sign of any issues that might end up needing an amendment. The national agency have 45 days to consider any contract amendments. Therefore, any requests for amendments must be received by the UK National Agency in good time and at least 1 month before the intended implementation of the changes in order to allow sufficient time for approval. The UK National Agency is unable to process an amendment request during the last month of the project activity in accordance with Commission guidance. Therefore, you should ensure that your project is on track and that no changes need to be made in advance of this. The next session of our webinar is about IT tools which are used to manage your project. Further to the workshop at the Key Action 1 convention, I will now give a quick recap of Mobility Tool Plus and your responsibilities, along with So what is Mobility Tool Plus? Firstly, a reminder that Mobility Tool Plus is the online management and reporting system for all projects awarded under the European Commission's Erasmus Plus programme. It has been developed by the European Commission, and it is a contractual requirement for all Key Action 1 vet and adult education projects to use the tool in order to report their project activities to the UK National Agency. This will include identifying participants and flows, completing and updating budgetary information, as well as generating, completing and submitting reports to the UK National Agency. As outlined in the special conditions of your project's grant agreement, all beneficiaries must at least once a month during the mobility project encode and update any new information regarding the participants and the mobility activities. Please do not leave this until the very end of the project. Please be aware that the National Agency may review your monitoring levels and/or risk rating if you do not update Mobility Tool Plus frequently. We recommend setting a recurring date every month where you will update Mobility Tool Plus with details regarding the latest completed project activities. This may include inputting new mobilities and budget information following an event or meeting. For those organisations completing their first project, you will receive login details and instructions for how to access your project with Mobility Tool Plus once it is uploaded by the National Agency. So please don't panic if you've not seen this yet. Additionally, the Commission regularly updates Mobility Tool Plus, so you may find that some of the functions will change over time. For further guidance, please consult the European Commission's new guide for beneficiaries, which explains the different steps to take with screenshots and clear explanations. It is directly available from the Mobility Tool Plus homepage. It is your responsibility to ensure the information in Mobility Tool Plus is accurate and kept up to date throughout your project. You'll have to provide information about your participants and their mobilities, including which receiving organisation they travel to, the duration of their placement, the languages they use, and how their learning outcomes are recognised. It is a contractual requirement for all participants to submit a participant report, and it's your responsibility to ensure that they receive the report and are able to complete and submit it. It is also your responsibility to generate, complete, and submit the final report through Mobility Tool Plus at the end of your project. I will now give an overview of the different monitoring activities used by the National Agency. Not all activities will apply for each project, but all projects will be regularly monitored in some way. Both the National Agency and you as the beneficiary are responsible for monitoring your project throughout its life cycle. Monitoring activities help us to inspect the progress of the project and to check if activities undertaken are in line with the rules and regulations, as well as the objectives set out in the original application. An example of this is the need for beneficiaries to evidence the transfer of individual support in its entirety to each participant, either by evidence of expenditure or evidence of subsistence being given to participants. By completing monitoring activities, we can recognise potential problems early on and offer help and advice if needed. This does not mean that you shouldn't contact us immediately when any problems arise or can be foreseen by your project. Monitoring will also help us identify best practice projects. We regularly invite projects to speak about their experience at one of our organised events, for example our national conference, and we will naturally pick projects that we are confident are delivering high quality mobilities and comply with our rules and regulations. Your project officer might also put forward best practice projects to be used as case studies for our website or general Erasmus Plus promotional material, giving your organisation and project a wider dissemination platform. Please remember you have a contractual obligation to provide us with project information if requested. Please have a look at Article 2.27.3 for further information. As we covered earlier, the main way the National Agency will be able to monitor your project is through Mobility Tool Plus. Using Mobility Tool Plus, your project officer will be able to see if the project is progressing as expected by checking if information about the mobilities has been provided correctly, preferably before a flow actually takes place. The National Agency also conducts monitoring calls or emails, monitoring visits, and in some cases financial on-the-spot checks and audits. If your projects have been selected for monitoring calls or regular update emails, your project officer will contact you to organise a schedule. As a beneficiary, you are responsible for continually evaluating your project and updating your project officer of any changes or developments. Regular monitoring is an essential part of this. I will now give more information on each of the monitoring activities. Some projects will be chosen to have quarterly calls with their project officer or have to submit quarterly emails. This will give a better chance to understand what you are doing and foresee any possible issues. Both will cover areas like recruitment and preparation, financial arrangements, outcomes and outputs, evaluation of different flows, and the project as a whole or your relationship with your partners. It is important that you are honest and forthcoming with information on all areas being discussed, so we can identify potential issues early on and offer help and advice when needed. Of course, we not only want to hear the things that are not going so well, but this is also your chance to tell us about the areas that you are particularly proud of. None of the monitoring activities are supposed to be a one-way street with the national agency asking all the questions. This is your chance to raise any questions or concerns you have as well. If your project officer is unable to answer your question immediately, he or she will get back to you within 2 working days. Your project officer might give you some recommendations or specific action points. The latter will have a clear deadline agreed by both parties, and you should make sure that these get resolved within the time frame given. It is a contractual obligation to provide all information requested by us and to take part in regular monitoring calls or emails if your project has been selected for one of them. Non-compliance may result in a suspension of your project until you provide the necessary information. You should therefore contact your project officer immediately if you foresee that you won't be available for the agreed phone call time, or to send in the email as agreed and explain the reasons for this. A random selection of projects will be selected for monitoring visits. The visit is an opportunity for you to take stock of the project's achievements and review your progress against the objectives. You will also be able to seek clarification and guidance on any aspects of the project lifecycle. The national agency will also explore examples of best practice from your project, which other projects may benefit from. The information gathered will also form part of our monitoring of the Erasmus programme as a whole and be used to inform reports produced by the national agency. During the visit, the project will be assessed against objectives set out in your original application. You will usually be visited by your project officer and another national agency representative. The visit will usually last half a working day, but may be longer in some instances. Monitoring visits are supposed to be more practical and in-depth than monitoring calls or emails. We would therefore like to actually see the templates and documents you use to run your project successfully. We also expect to meet at least one of your participants for parts of the visit. You should give good reasons if this is not possible. Someone from the national agency will contact you at least 1 month in advance of the planned visit. While we are aware of your busy schedules and will try to be as accommodating as possible, in agreeing a date for the visit, we expect you to be proactive in finding a suitable date and not to postpone the visit indefinitely without any plausible reason. Such behaviour can lead to a temporary suspension of your project. The national agency will also complete on-the-spot financial checks on project activities or triggering events during a random sample of monitoring visits. Triggering events for VET projects are mobility activities for both students as well as staff. For adult education projects, this also includes the actual courses undertaken during the mobility itself. The purpose of the on-the-spot checks is to provide assurance on the legality and eligibility of the project activities. During the check, the financial management and record keeping will be looked at to ensure that it is appropriate. You should make sure that all necessary documents are available and the people dealing with the financial side of your project are present to answer any questions that might arise during the check. We will let you know ahead of time if your project has been chosen for an on-the-spot check and which documents should be provided. You should ensure all your documents are collected, filed correctly, and up to date continuously throughout the lifetime of your project. Here is a short overview of the different areas you will need to provide documents for, if applicable. If you are providing linguistic support for your students, we expect to see receipts for language training and/or learning materials. You will need to have declaration of attendance for each participant going on a flow, both for learners as well as staff mobilities. These need to be signed by the receiving organisation, show the correct name of the participant, the purpose of the activity, and the exact start and end dates as a minimum. You can include more information if you wish. Adult education projects will also need to provide proof of course fee payments. The individual support budget needs to be spent in full on each individual. You can evidence this through invoices for accommodation, if booked by you, bank statements showing transactions either to service providers or the participants themselves, or receipts for cash transfers to the participant. You could evidence spending of organisational support money through planning meetings, recruitment process, or dissemination, for example. You should also retain documents such as Europass if used, partner agreements, project timelines, budget spreadsheets if used, or documents relating to ECVET. Please note that this is not an exhaustive list. A small number of projects will be subject to system checks. Since half of the checks will focus on the overall processes in place for running projects effectively, only recurrent beneficiaries who have run several projects already will be considered for system checks. A priority will be given to VET Mobility Charter holders to ensure that all processes named in their VMC application continue to be in place and of high quality. System checks are carried out in two phases. The first one will look at the overall procedure within your organisation setup to ensure an efficient delivery of high quality projects. Phase 2 will be an on-the-spot check, as explained earlier, for an ongoing Erasmus Key Action 1 project. All rules for a normal on-the-spot check apply. Both phases can be done at the same time or separately. Please note that all original documents should be made available during the checks. As mentioned in the example previously, all beneficiaries are required to evidence the transfer of individual support in its entirety to each participant. Therefore, evidence would be expected of expenditures such as invoices or evidence of subsistence being given to participants either by bank transfer records or participants completing side reports. We will let you know if you've been selected for a systems check together with more detailed information. I will now give you a short overview of your main responsibilities concerning monitoring activities. Effective monitoring throughout your project will allow you to evaluate the project's progress and success on an ongoing basis. Updating the mobility tool efficiently and regularly will help you and your project officer to monitor your project and highlight any issues, especially with the budget. We expect you to update Mobility Tool Plus once a month. You need to keep all relevant documents and receipts linked to your project and make them available to the National Agency together with any information when requested. Finally, monitoring activities are not just good for us to monitor your project, but also for you to showcase the good work you are doing. Therefore, we expect that you will actively participate in any monitoring activities chosen for your project. I will now cover the reporting requirements, go into detail the different types of report required if applicable, plus some hints and tips for completing and submitting them to the National Agency. First, let's have a look at the different types of reports you'll need to be familiar with. Final reports. These are a contractual requirement to be completed by all projects. Interim reports. Not all projects will need to complete one of these, but I'll explain more on these shortly. Progress reports. These are new to Key Action 1 VET and adult education projects for 2017. Only a few projects will need to complete a progress report. You can find further information about these reports and which of these you are required to complete in your grant agreement. As with interim reports, I'll explain a little bit more about these shortly. And finally, there are also participant reports. As well as these formal reports, we also expect all your organisations to report back to us during the lifetime of your project to let us know how your project is getting on. It's really useful if you can email us from time to time to let us know how these things are progressing with your project so that we can foresee any issues. As well as these more informal updates, as per your grant agreement, you should also update Mobility Tool Plus at least once a month during your project lifetime. Formal reporting is a contractual requirement for both Key Action 1 VET and adult education projects to provide the National Agency with both financial and qualitative information about the project. All of your organisations will need to submit a final report and participant reports, and these are to be submitted electronically via Mobility Tool Plus. We don't need to receive any paper copies, although you can print and retain paper copies for your own reference. I'll start with final reports, as these are required for all Key Action 1 projects within the Erasmus Plus programme. You will need to submit a final report for your project within 60 days of its end date as per your grant agreement. Please be aware that reports should not be submitted before the end date of your project as it will not be accepted. If you submit your report before the project end date, it will not be assessed any quicker and you will not be able to receive final payments any sooner. We will send all project notifications and emails and reminders, along with guidance on completing and submitting the final report towards the end of your project and during the 60-day timeline. The purpose of the final report is to allow the National Agency to assess the completed project in terms of quality, as well as ensuring the requested budget of your grant is eligible. The budget section of your final report is drawn straight from the information you input into the Mobility Tool Plus. Therefore, this is another reason to make sure you're keeping the tool up to date over the course of the project. The draft of the final report will be updated with new information as soon as you have added at least one mobility, so that you can start working on the report. As you add more mobilities to the budget information in the report, it will automatically be updated the next time you open the final report draft. Please ensure that all information in Mobility Tool Plus is accurate and up to date, and to ensure that the budget in the final report is correct before submission. Once you've completed the narrative sections of the report, it will be ready to submit. Mobility Tool Plus will then ask you to sign an annex, signed declaration of honour, as you did for your applications. Once you submit the report, it is sent to our systems ready for assessment. Please note, if you fail to submit your final report within 30 days of the final deadline date, the National Agency reserves the right to terminate the project in line with the conditions set out in your grant agreement and request a full refund of all pre-financing payments received. The project is not finished until we have received the final report. As mentioned before, the final report automatically pulls information through from Mobility Tool Plus on the participating organisations, the number of participants and the type of mobility they carried out, i.e. vet learners mobility, staff training abroad, teaching training assignments abroad, participation in a structured course. What learning recognitions have been received by the participants, if you have indicated that they have received Europass certification or ECVET, the final grant amount reported in the tool and the spend against each individual budget heading. You will have to manually complete several sections of narrative within the report. A summary of the completed project, which may be used on the Erasmus Plus dissemination platform, the Erasmus Plus project results platform. A description of the project objectives and how you evaluated the extent to which these objectives were met. The project's practical arrangements and the project management and monitoring processes that you had in place. The project activities and how they were organised. The learning outcomes gained by the project participants, the impact of the project on its participants, participating organisations and other stakeholders if relevant, how the project results and achievements have been disseminated. Please do not submit a fully copy and paste version of your application form. We're happy for you to use your application to reference original aims, objectives and plans. However, the final report should be written after all activities have taken place. Please tell us what actually happened, including, for example, any changes, any problems, anything that went particularly well, and any expected impact. You should use your final report to really show off to us how good your project was. When you submit your final report, you will need to make sure the Declaration of Honour is attached. However, no additional supporting documents are required at this stage unless you have been awarded a budget for and have claimed exceptional costs, for which you'll need to send us original copies of receipts and invoices. When we acknowledge your report, we will let you know if your project has been selected for a desk check, for which we'll need to see hard copy evidence of payments to participants, as well as participant agreements and certificates of attendance. So please retain all documentation related to your project in case they are requested. These documents should also be retained in case of future audits. All Key Action 1 projects must retain evidence of subsistence payments to beneficiaries, demonstrating that participants have received the full amount of subsistence they are owed for their mobility. This may be in the form of invoices for payments made directly to your organisation to the participant, or in the form of signed receipts, bank transfers by the participant. Please note that if you cannot demonstrate that all of the individual support has been spent on or paid to participants, this will either affect the final payment amount that you receive, or in the case of a significant underspend of the grant, you may be requested to refund some of the pre-financing payments received to the National Agency. Further guidance on how to complete your final report will be sent to you by email when your project finishes. Once we receive your report, it goes through several different stages. Firstly, there's an initial check, where we make sure all the information has been provided within the final report and any supporting documents. Here we also check if you've been selected for a desk check. After this, we will send you an acknowledgement of receipt of your report to let you know that the assessment process has begun. We will also let you know at this point if you need to give us more information towards a desk check. The final report then goes through two different types of assessment, one quality assessment and one financial assessment. The quality assessment is scored out of a maximum of 100 points based on specific quality criteria, which focuses on the extent on which activities were implemented in line with your approved application, the project's overall quality and the impact on participating organisations, the extent in which the grants due to mobility participants were transferred to them in accordance with contractual provisions set out within learning agreements between the beneficiary and the participant following the template provided in Annex 4 of the agreement. The quality assessment looks at what you have put in your final report against what was in your application form, taking into account any changes that you had to make during your project. The assessor will look at a selection of participant reports to see how their learning objectives were met, and may look at any project results you have available, for instance websites, and particularly the Erasmus Plus project results platform. As I said before, you should use a final report to show off your project. The assessor wants to see the value of the project. Please be aware that if during the assessment a report is found to be of a poorer quality, or if the report is unfinished, a grant reduction may be applied to the final grant amount for the organisational support. Grant reductions consist of the following: a 25% reduction if the final report scores between 41 and 50 points inclusive, a 50% reduction if the final report scores between 26 and 40 points inclusive, and a 75% reduction if the final report scores between 0 and 25 points inclusive. The financial assessment looks at the budget information supplied within your final report, which, as explained before, comes straight from the data you input into Mobility Tool Plus over the lifetime of your project. The assessor checks that the stated project costs are eligible and do not exceed those set out in your grant agreement. Please be aware that you won't be reimbursed for any costs which are deemed ineligible. You should note that the travel distance bands entered for each participant mobility will also be checked against the European Commission's distance calculator. If any costs have been overstated by using a higher distance band than required, the final grant amount will be reduced accordingly. Don't assume that the distance bands used in your original application were correct. Some were corrected where the assessors noticed mistakes at application stage, but not all distances were individually checked, so make sure you check them again when entering information into Mobility Tool Plus. If you've made any budget transfers over the lifetime of your project, you should have already informed your project officer. But if not, it is a good idea to make them aware when you submit your final report, so this can be taken into account during the financial assessment. As I mentioned earlier, some organisations will be identified to complete an interim report halfway through the project lifecycle. This is typical for any organisations that have a reduced payment structure. Therefore, this report needs to be submitted in order to request the next pre-financing instalment of your grant. The interim report is a short document that asks you to provide a comprehensive overview of how the project has been implemented and to provide budget information detailing how the grant has been spent to date. At present, the interim report is in a Word document format that will be sent to you by the national agency to complete 2 months before it is due. However, the European Commission is currently planning to integrate this into Mobility Tool Plus, so in future it will be completed in the same way as final reports. This report, as the name implies, is due exactly halfway through the project. If the report is a request for the next payment, then the national agency will make any second payment due within 60 days of receiving the report. The progress reports are for organisations on payment structures and include 3 pre-financing payments. The progress report is intended to provide a snapshot of the development of your project so far, and as such, you should include information on activities undertaken to date, any examples of best practice within your project, information on how project is being managed, and details of any difficulties you may have encountered and how these are being addressed. The 2017 Core Progress Report template is a Word document which will be sent to you by email, along with this guidance, by your project officer. Please ensure that the information you include in your report covers the period from the start date of your project up to the end of the progress report reporting period. All vet and adult education learners and staff who have completed mobility activities abroad must complete a participant report after the end of their mobility. The only exception to this is accompanying persons. Completion of the participant report is obligatory, and it is your responsibility as a project coordinator to ensure that 100% of your participants fill in and submit the participant report successfully. Any organisation with less than 100% completion rate will see their final grant reduced and will not receive payment for any mobilities missing our participant report. The participant report takes the form of an online survey hosted by EU Survey and asks the learner or staff member to rate their mobility experience based on a number of different factors, such as the quality of the placement, the level of support received from the sending and receiving organisations, and on their own personal and professional development. Vet learners who have undertaken a placement of a month or more are also asked to evaluate the linguistic support that they receive. Once the participant has completed and submitted the report, a PDF copy of the report appears in Mobility Tool Plus, which can be viewed by the project coordinator. Mobility Tool Plus will then automatically email a link to the survey to each participant the day after the mobility end date. If for any reason the link is not received by the participant, the project coordinator can go into Mobility Tool Plus and request that the report is resent. Please check first that the participant's email address has been entered correctly and that there are no other factors preventing the receipt of the link, such as the individual's email setting for blocking spam or junk mail. Either way, we would recommend that participants complete the reports while the mobility experience is still fresh in their mind, and while you are still able to contact them to ensure 100% completion of the reports. So finally, I just want to run through some hints and tips to help you successfully complete your report. Firstly, we recommend that you update Mobility Tool Plus on an ongoing basis and regularly check that all budgetary information and mobilities have been entered correctly and completely. Regularly checking the Mobility Tool Plus may also mean that if there is a technical issue that prevents you from entering the correct information, you can notify the national agency in good time for us to advise you with this. If there are any changes to organisation's data or to the project itself, please also notify your project officer, as the national agency may need to update Mobility Tool Plus for you. Keep track of all documents related to the project and keep these as organised in case we request anything from you as evidence alongside your reports. Please make sure the documents required for each learner are completed in good time before the report submission. We would recommend obtaining up-to-date contact details for each learner, so if there are any issues with documents, such as participant reports, you can get in touch with them. In the final part of this webinar, I will give an overview of the dissemination methods and requirements expected throughout your project lifetime. Dissemination is a term used by the European Commission in many of its documents and simply means to spread widely. All projects are encouraged to share or disseminate the successes of their project. This means that even after your project finishes, the successes can still have an impact in the future. So why should you promote and disseminate your project? Annex 1 General Conditions of your contract states that any communication or publication made by the beneficiary that relates to the action, including at conferences, seminars, or in any informational or promotional materials, such as brochures, leaflets, posters, presentations, in electronic form, and so on, must A. indicate that the action has received funding from the Union, and B. display the European Union emblem. Therefore, the main aim is to spread the word and endorse the project's results. It can help raise a profile of your organisation, create new opportunities to extend the project, and develop partnerships for the future. You will also be asked to detail the dissemination activities as part of reporting requirements, so it is a good thing to bear in mind at the start of, during, and after your project. To help you meet these requirements and to help you disseminate in the press, including how to use the Erasmus Plus emblem, the National Agency has a dedicated webpage for promotion and dissemination. The kind of things you could share include fresh brochures to tackle a problem, products such as e-learning tools and handbooks, best practice case studies, leaflets, and much more. The programme guide has more details about the kinds of physical or tangible outputs such as these and wider experiences you may wish to share. We would expect to see this promotion on your website. You can download our emblem and upload it to your website with the promotional ideas above. On your social media, you can tag us on Twitter at Erasmus Plus UK when sharing information about your project and use our hashtags #E+People and #Erasmus Plus UK. In the media, getting the media to talk about your project helps to share what you are doing with a larger audience. Please look at our press pack for more information. On our own pages, you can send us a case study or keep us in the loop with your media coverage to be featured in our monthly press roundup. Can we include a slide? So for a few tips for dissemination, we suggest the following. Involve your partners and participants. Perhaps your partners already have dissemination models and procedures in place that could be utilised across the project. Promotion of mobilities can also take place through participants, such as with blogs or photo diaries. Use different social media and press channels. Utilise a variety of outlets to share your findings along with any success stories. Involve the local community. Local and regional dissemination through newspapers and websites in your area. Targeting the relevant industry or sector to your project through contact with organisations or publications keen to promote your VET or adult education mobility. Finally, don't be afraid to be creative or dynamic. The list above is not exhaustive, and there are always new methods of dissemination being used, especially with new technology and programs. So feel free to be inspired to try something new. The European Commission developed a web-based dissemination platform for all Erasmus Plus projects to take advantage of. Some of you who have already had Erasmus Plus projects will have heard of this referred to previously as VALO. Now this is known as the Erasmus Plus Project Results Platform. This platform was designed to serve several purposes. Firstly, to act as a database, showing all the projects funded under the programme. Secondly, to provide access to the project results and main outcomes, such as websites, and finally to showcase good practice examples and success stories. They will be chosen each year with an annual selection by the national agency, and the European Commission dissemination and increasing project impact is a big priority under the Erasmus Plus programme. So we really advise you to take as much advantage of free resources like this as much as possible in order to give your projects and results an extra boost. You can access this at any time to see the types of things other organisations post for their projects. So thank you for your attention and participation today. To confirm, the Key Action 1 handbook will be available shortly on the UK National Agency website. All projects will be allocated project officers soon, and all projects will be given access to Mobility Tool Plus over the next few weeks. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at erasmusplus@chorus.com or the number on this screen. As said before, our team are also available every day from Monday to Friday to answer any queries you may have via the erasmusplus@chorus.com inbox or our helpline. You can see the number on the slide and you can find it in your handout as well. If there are any questions we haven't managed to answer during the session this afternoon, we'll get back to you by email afterwards. Do also keep an eye on the Erasmus Plus UK National Agency website for further guidance. We hope you found this session useful today, and we wish you luck with your projects.